So you got a new stem. Let's put it on. Okay, so I got this new Alienation stem and I figured it would be a perfect time to make a video on how to take off your old stem and put on a new one. So let's get this started. First thing we're gonna do is talk about the tools that you're gonna need. You're gonna need a 6, 1/4 inch, 5mm, whatever your bolts are on your stem. And then you're gonna need the compression cap size. And usually that's either a 6, an 8, or sometimes it's even the 3/8 socket wrench, square, whatever you want to call this thing here. Sometimes that's how you take your top cap off too. But first thing we're going to do in taking off our old stem is loosen the side bolts on the old stem. So I'm going to fast forward through any of these parts where I'm not talking while I take things off and put things on. Now we got the side bolts loosened on the stem. Let's loosen the compression cap. You can use the Allen wrenches like I was just using, but I like to use this because it gets out of the way of the bars and it just makes it easier to turn. Come on guys, I'm trying to do a video over here. If you hear this in the background, I'm sorry. Okay, so you can see we got the compression cap out here, and the reason why we loosen the side bolts before we loosen the compression cap is because they take off the pressure from the steer tube and make it easier to loosen the compression cap. And the reason why we didn't take the bars off first is because the bars being on the stem still makes it extremely easy to get the stem off of the steer tube, whereas if the bars were off of the stem, it becomes very hard to take the stem off from the steer tube when all you have to hold on to is the stem itself. And usually this is how I do it. I stand over the bike, grab the front wheel with my legs the way I am, and I spin the bars back and forth while pulling up on the stem. Sometimes it's a tight fit, sometimes it just comes right off. And if you have a gyro, don't forget to take your cables out of the bottom part of the gyro, because if you don't, the gyro won't come off. Gyro plate and gyro off. So now that we got the old stem and bars off, now we're ready for the new stem. There's a couple things that you're going to want to keep in mind whenever you have a new stem. First, you're going to want to grease all of your bolts. Second, you're going to want to sand out the contact surface where the stem contacts the bars if necessary. Sometimes it doesn't have the knurling in there and you don't want your bars slipping, so a little bit of sanding will help that. And third, you want to look at whether or not you need more spacers underneath the stem itself. So I'm going to slide my stem on here, and we're going to see that if I didn't have a gyro plate, we would need more spacers under here because the steer tube is sticking out of the stem. The way I like to do this is I like to keep at least 3/4 of the stem taken up by steer tube just for safety's sake. So when I put the gyro plate and bars back on there, we're going to have that 3/4 taken up, and we're going to have enough room to tighten the compression cap without bottoming it out. So now you can see I have the gyro plate and gyro on the stem, and I put my bars on here, but one important thing to note with this is that I only snugged them down so the bars would not move, because the last step we're going to do is tighten the bars all the way down on the stem. So we got the gyro plate in here, and you can see there's enough of a gap in here that we're going to be able to put the compression cap on and tighten it without it bottoming out the compression cap. So that's what we're going to do next. One important thing to note while we're putting the compression cap on is that we do not want to tighten the side bolts on the stem before we tighten the compression cap, because that would be counterproductive. Tightening the side bolts means that the stem can't move up and down, and that is what the compression cap does. It tightens the stem down and tightens the headset at the same time. So first things first, we tighten the compression cap down. Okay, now that we have the compression cap tightened down, we can straighten the stem out with the tires and align it. I just stand there, hold the tire with my legs, and move the stem back and forth until it is aligned with the front tire. It's usually a good idea to take a look at it from the front. Looks good to me. So once you have your stem aligned with your tire, you're going to want to tighten your 2 side bolts on the stem. Alternate your tightening pattern with these. You don't want to tighten one side all the way down and then tighten the other side. You want to do it evenly all the way through. One thing to note with tightening your side stem bolts down is that you don't want this gap to disappear. It's there for a reason, and if you tighten it down enough to make this gap disappear, you're probably going to crack your stem. So for tightening these, I usually go to about 1 grunt. So you tighten it, you go, and then you just make sure it's a little bit snug and you should be good to go. Okay, so once your compression bolt and the side bolts of the stem are tight, the last thing that you're going to want to do is tighten the bolts that tighten down the top plate of the stem and keep your bars locked in place. There's a couple things that you really need to take note of whenever you're tightening your top cap down. Number 1, you want your bars to be centered in the stem. If you don't have your bars centered and you go through all of these steps, you're going to have to start over. So once your bars are centered, you want to start tightening down the bolts, and you want to do it in a crisscross pattern. So if we start with the top left bolt the way that we're looking at it right now, you tighten this one down a little bit, then you move to the bottom right bolt, then you move to the bottom left bolt, and then you move to the top right bolt. And you don't want to tighten these bolts all the way down while you're doing this. You want to do it gradually. So you tighten each one a little bit and evenly all the way around until it's all the way tightened down. And while you're doing this, you need to pay attention to the gap between the top plate and the stem body itself. There's a front gap and there's a back gap. And no matter what kind of stem that you have, there's going to be 2 gaps in the stem that you need to pay attention to, the front and the back, or the top and the bottom. The front and the back gap should all be exactly the same. You should never have more of a gap in the front than you do in the back, and you want to tighten them and pay attention to this gap while you're tightening them. And if you have a stem like this one, where it's got 2 separate top plates and they're not connected in one, you got to pay attention even more and go even slower and do this gradually so that all of the gaps are exactly the same all the way around, and you're tightening each bolt the exact same amount as you're doing it. And if you over tighten any or all of these bolts, it can equal a weak stem plate, and that is not something that you want, because that can lead to your stem breaking, and a broken stem is not something that you ever want to have to deal with. Another thing you want to take note of before you tighten the bars down is their position forward or backwards. I like to ride my bars a little bit forward, like the tiniest amount. Some people ride them to where the bars vertically are exactly lined up with their forks. It just kind of depends on what you like and where you like to keep your bars at. And if you have any problems with any part of this while putting the stem on, you can work on things independently of each other. If your bars are too far to one side or the other, or they're too far back or forward, you can work on the bar position independently of the back of the stem. If your headset's too tight or your stem doesn't line up with your tire, you can work on that independently of the bars as well. All you need to make sure of is if you're loosening or tightening this compression cap, that your side bolts are loose. I'll say that again. If you're loosening or tightening the compression cap, make sure that the side bolts on the stem are loose. That is the main thing that you need to pay attention to, aside from keeping the gap on the stem plate exactly the same all the way around and tightening these exactly the same all the way around. So hopefully you guys found this video useful and it helped you put on your new stem. Thanks for watching. If you have any comments, concerns, questions, anything like that, leave them in the comments below, and we'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching again, guys. Goodbye.